Honorable Mr. Paul Becker, the expert at ARISE Indonesia, and also respectable industry leaders from Kadin, Bapak Alexander Yahya Datuk, from Nike, Ibu Devi Kusmaningtyas, from PT Panasonic Indonesia, Bapak Daniel Suhardiman, and from PT Hyundai Motor Manufacturing Indonesia, Bapak Triwahono Broto Sanjoyo. I'm sure it's going to be a great 2 hours of interaction and learning for all of us. This webinar will be held mostly in English, but for the participants, feel free to chat any comment or questions in the chat room in Bahasa. We will be happy to interpret it for you. And also, please kindly use the virtual background that's provided by the organizer at the chat room. So now, without further ado, we are now going to listen the opening remarks by Ibu Amalia Adininggar Widyasanti. Ibu Winnie is the Deputy for Economic Affairs at Bappenas, having previously filled a particular role as a senior advisor to the Minister of Economic and Financing, Ministry of National Development Planning. She has strong interest in macroeconomic issues, trade and economic development, as well as economic modeling and analysis. Let's hear from her experience and views on the main topic of this webinar. Bu Winnie, it's yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Pak Revindo, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Bapak Thibaut Portevin, Head of Cooperation of European Delegation to Indonesia, Bapak Eko Cahyanto, Director General of Industrial Resilience Region and International Industrial Access, Ministry of Industry of Indonesia, Bapak Hari Widodo, Director of Market Development and Export Information, Ministry of Trade, Indonesia, Bapak Alexander Yahya Datuk, Head of Bilateral Committee at Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Bapak Daniel Suhardiman, Vice President Director of PT Panasonic Manufacturing Indonesia, Bapak Triwahono Broto Sanjoyo, Director of External Affairs of PT Hyundai Motor Manufacturing Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, and a very good afternoon for all of us. On behalf of the government of Indonesia, I would like to express my appreciation to the European Union for the commitment to support Indonesia through a ARISE Plus trade support facility. The high-level participation of the government of Indonesia as represented by relevant line ministries in this meeting today is actually a testament to the effort that we are all eager to contribute to the realization of a greater partnership between Indonesia and the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, the Indonesian-European Union Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or we call it EU-CEPA, the negotiation is still ongoing today. The ARISE Plus Indonesia contributes to funding numerous projects of capacity building to relevant Indonesian ministries and agencies in order to ensure Indonesia can be ready to welcome the EU-CEPA and the other possible FTAs that can enhance the Indonesian competitiveness in the global value chain. These will also include knowledge sharing activities as well as dissemination and communication of the outcomes and the result of this comprehensive economic partnership agreement at national and subnational level. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the strategies adopted in order to increase our economic growth through trade and investment is actually to increase Indonesia's participation in the global value chain. For this year, we have jointly prepared a series of activities that will be carried out together under the ARISE Plus program, and one of which is a study on the impact of COVID-19 on global value chains relevant to Indonesian export and the development of a recovery roadmap. And the aim of this session today is to obtain a deep understanding of the impact of COVID-19 across economic sectors and also their value chains in Indonesia. So we can sharpen our trade recovery, and also we can enhance our investment policy to recover stronger and to escape from the impact of the pandemic and enhance the Indonesian participation in the global value chain. Broadly speaking, there are 3 studies will be presented in this project. The first study discusses the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia and the policy responses that have been taken. And then the analysis the overall trade and global value chains performance from a global and Indonesian perspective. The second study provides deep dives into Indonesia's participation and position in the global value chain, as well as the impact of COVID-19 on the performance of selected priority sectors that hold strategic importance to Indonesia's economy. The 5 chosen sectors are food and beverages, textile, electronics, automotive, and footwear. And last but not least, the third study presents the results of industry surveys on the impact of COVID-19 on the businesses in Indonesia and the relevance and effectiveness of government responses with focus on trade. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank to our expert consultants for their hard work on this project, as well as the excellent cooperation between ARISE Plus Indonesia and stakeholders. So we can have this study completed and be presented to all of us today. From this study, I hope that together we can formulate the most appropriate policies to be able to restore Indonesia trade activities and increase Indonesia's participation in the global value chain. Also, Indonesia should not be left behind to catch the changes that occur during and after the pandemic, and we have to be able to provide the right responses to it. Without further ado, I really thank you to all participants that join and participate in today's webinar, and looking forward to your active participation in the discussion. Thank you and have a pleasant webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Ibu Winnie, for invaluable remarks. I think the points are very well taken. The first point that was provided by Ibu Winnie is that the disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic should not put off Indonesia from the involvement in global value chain. And the second one is that the trade could be one way that lead us to economic recovery. So thank you for that, Ibu Winnie. Now I will invite Mr. Thibaut Portavin to give the second opening remarks. Mr. Portavin is the head of Cooperation European Delegation to Indonesia. Prior to this, he was a policy officer at the European Commission, Brussels, in 2013, and held that role until 2021. He obtained a Master of Science degree in economics and also business management from Paris. And let's hear from his experience and views on the main topic of this webinar. Mr. Portavin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Ibu Amalia Widiasanti, Deputy for Economic Affairs in Bappenas. Bapak Eko Charyanto, Director General at the Ministry of Industry. Senior officials from the Ministries of Trade, Industry from Kadin, Indonesia. Mr. Kwaipun, Team Leader of ARISE Plus Indonesia. And all the participants from ministries, agencies, business associations, academia, everyone. Selamat siang. It's a great pleasure to represent the EU at this webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on global value chains. This is a very topical question, and I'm glad that the EU is able to engage with Indonesia on the impacts and the response to COVID-19. The EU-funded ARISE Plus program has just completed this study, which looks at the impact of the pandemic on value chains that are relevant to Indonesian exports, and this is what we will discuss today. Let me start by sharing a few inputs on the COVID-19 crisis and the recovery in the EU. Obviously, the pandemic has had stronger effects on the EU economy. In 2020, the EU faced an unprecedented economic contraction. The GDP fell by 6.1%. EU intra-trade reduced by 24%. 60% of SMEs reported a fall in their turnover. And the unemployment rate increased from 6.3% in late 2019 to 7.7% in September 2020. So how about value chains? Disruptions occurred across many sectors, but most value chains were able to start to recover in the fourth quarter of 2020. Digital and healthcare industries performed quite well, and enabling industries like chemicals, construction, and food and beverages experienced a V-shaped recovery. On the other side, other sectors that require physical proximity, cultural sectors, for example, or the aerospace industry, have been hit hard and are likely to suffer for extended periods from these shocks. Let me say a few words about the EU's policy response now. So the EU responded with an ambitious policy and financial package at all levels. There were measures at the level of member states, which provided strong support to businesses and workers, for example, through short-time work schemes and liquidity support. And at the EU level, the European Central Bank provided fiscal and monetary policy measures. Action at EU level was also decisive to ensure the development, the procurement, and coordinated distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. But I would like to focus a bit more on the mid and long-term measures beyond these emergency measures. There's been a lot of ambition at EU level with the establishment of the EU Recovery and Resilience Facility. This facility provides a package of grants and loans, which are worth more than 700 billion euros, to support reforms and investments undertaken by member states. And this facility aims to mitigate the economic and social impacts of the pandemic by making European companies and societies more sustainable, resilient, and better prepared for the challenges and opportunities of the green and digital transitions. As we're in the middle of COP26 on climate change in Glasgow, where our leaders met this week, including Commission President von der Leyen and Indonesian President Jokowi, I would like to emphasize a strong focus on environmental sustainability in EU's recovery package. This is not only a matter of climate action for the EU, but it's also a matter of sustainable and resilient growth based on investment in sectors such as renewable energy, sustainable transport, or energy efficient buildings. I also take the opportunity to mention that green sectors are areas where the EU is too keen to further cooperate with Indonesia. And this was mentioned by Commission Vice President Frans Timmermans, who visited Jakarta 2 weeks ago. Coming back to the COVID-19 impacts on value chains, there are many signs that showing that Indonesia is on the way to boost its recovery and to improve medium-term economic prospects. Progress in tackling the pandemic over the last months have been really impressive. There may be many opportunities to elevate post-pandemic reconstruction efforts to incorporate greener policies and to contribute to greenhouse gas emission reduction commitments made at COP26. Such action will also set the tone for Indonesia's G20 presidency, which made climate resilience, low carbon development, and green technology among its top priorities. As a long member of G20 and as a long-standing partner to Indonesia, the EU fully supports these priorities. ARISE Plus Indonesia, the support facility, is one of the key instruments supporting our economic cooperation. Despite logistical and operational constraints during the pandemic, the program has maintained its momentum and contributed to address emergency health requirements, for example, through capacity building of university teaching hospitals, which helped mitigate the impacts of the pandemic on vulnerable groups in poor regions. I'm also glad that the program is able to support some of the government priorities with high-quality research, concrete actions, and expertise in addressing topics related to enhanced competitiveness and integration into global value chains. The series of studies, which will be presented by our expert later, is meant to fit into policy dialogues, such as today, with eminent panelists. Their insights and perspectives will be crucial to continuously enrich and inform Indonesia's recovery strategy. It's worth noting that one of the recommendations of the studies is to involve the private sector in policy making and to address business needs in the recovery period, especially under the proposal to increase the resilience of supply chains. I understand Bappenas is already implementing this recommendation, so I'm confident that the program is indeed providing a valuable contribution to EU-Indonesia cooperation. As Ibu Amalia Widyasanti referred to the CEPA, I also note that ARISE Plus Indonesia offers flexibility to respond to the needs emerging from the negotiations through a rapid response facility. A trade and investment agreement between the EU and Indonesia remains a very important objective for both sides. Our economies are complementary, as CEPA can help attract foreign investment, which in turn will bring jobs, skills, and technology. This is also part of the equation when it comes to integration into global value chains. The discussion today will bring further light into these issues. I'm looking forward to hearing to the panelists. And to conclude, I wish you all a successful and fruitful webinar today. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you, Mr. Portavin. It's very precise and informative remarks, and the points were well taken. The pandemic hits everyone hard, and European Union is not exception. And the impact is asymmetric across the sectors. So there's a different path to recovery, and it needs different policy measures. And EU is committed to recover together with the rest of the world. Thank you again, Mr. Portavin. And now we will hold a photo session. Speakers, panelists, and participants, please kindly turn your video on. And Ibu Siti or Ibu Maya, can you take the photo of us? Let us know if it's done already.
Oke, thank you Pak Revindo. Kepada seluruh Bapak Ibu peserta, mohon untuk mengaktifkan video karena kami sebentar lagi akan mengambil gambar. Di layar komputer kami ada 6 slide. Jadi mohon bersabar Bapak Ibu ya. Setelah hitungan ketiga akan diambil oleh panitia. Oke, akan dimulai Bapak Ibu. Slide pertama 1, 2, 3. Oke, terima kasih. Slide kedua selanjutnya 1, 2, 3. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu. Slide ketiga 1, 2, 3. Oke, slide keempat 1, 2, 3. Slide kelima 1, 2, 3. Dan slide yang terakhir 1, 2, 3. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu.
Yeah, thank you for the photo session. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome our first panelist from the policy perspective. We are extremely honored to welcome Bapak Eko Cahyanto. He's the Director General of Resilience, Territorial and International Industrial Access at the Ministry of Industry. He previously served as the head of the Industrial Human Resource and Development Agency in 2019 and 2020. He obtained his Master of Laws degree from the University of Washington, Seattle. Bapak Eko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pak Revindo. Should I speak in Bahasa or English, Pak Revindo? Because I assume that all of the participants here have better Bahasa than my English.
Feel free to, it's your choice, Pak.
Okay, thank you, Pak Revindo. Maybe I will mix the presentation since I'm still in quarantine. I just back from Dubai for Dubai Expo, Pak Revindo. So I have very limited time to prepare in English, but I'll try to explain it. Yet we can explore it from the discussions aftermath. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, first I would like to say thank you for the Bappenas and ARISE to inviting me to speak in this forum. Despite COVID-19 pandemic still lingering around our life, as I hope everyone and their loved ones stay safe and healthy. And now I would like to share with you the presentation I want to share. Please allow me to share.
I think you are a co-host already. Let me know if it's not work.
Okay, I will share the screen.
Yes.
Can you see the?
Yes, it's clear now, Pak.
Okay. First, I would like to talk about the Indonesian economic proven resilience than most countries despite the COVID-19 pandemic that has hit us very hard. Based on data from the ADB, outlook, the economic growth in Indonesia is at minus 2.07% in 2020, which makes Indonesia a country with a moderate level of economic contraction during the COVID-19 pandemic. It is better than the average economic growth of countries in Southeast Asia and much better than the average of G20 member countries. The Indonesia economic growth in the second quarter of 2021 grew by 7.07% year over year, the highest in the last 16 years. One of the main things supporting high economic growth is the growth of the non-oil and gas manufacturing sector, which reached 6.91% in the second quarter of 2021. As our top 5 manufacturing sector are the transport equipment industry by 45.7%, then base metal industry by 18.03%, machinery and equipment industry by 16.35%, then rubber industry, rubber and plastic products 11.72%, and chemical and pharmaceutical, and also the traditional medicine industry by 9.15%. The revival of the national economic in the second quarter of 2021 cannot be separated from the performance of several its constituent sectors, one of which is the manufacturing industry. The sector grew positively by 6.58% and become the largest contributor to the source of growth in the second quarter of 2021. The manufacturing industry contribute 1.35% of the total growth of 7.07% of the national economic. Of the 1.35% of the processing industry, the non-oil and gas processing industry contribute 1.23%. We are confident that we will maintain steady and relatively fast economic growth this year. We can take a look in this chart contribution of the non-oil and gas industry sector to GDP in semester 1 and in 2021, as processing industry is the leading contributor to Indonesian GDP with almost up to 20%. And our top 5 non-oil gas manufacturing sector in the second quarter of 2021, and you can see the in the right side, the first food and beverage industry, and the second chemical, pharmaceutical and traditional medicine industry, then transport equipment industry, the fourth metal, computer, electronic, optical and electronic equipment industry, then textile and apparel industry. Now we move to the Indonesian import-export value. From January to August 2021, the export contribution of the industrial sector was 78.16% of the total national export, the 142 billion US dollar, or for industry it's 110.9 billion contribution. Now to the industrial sector investment value. In Indonesia, we can see even the COVID was started in 2019, it also saw the decreasing on our foreign direct investment. But it shows an increase in 2020, and by 2021, it has increased again higher than 2020. It also, we thanks to our government who work hard for distributing vaccines throughout the country because it shows by the Purchasing Managers Index last month, it reached 57.2, and it is the highest in the regions. Now we move to the next slide. We can see there are a lot of business unit categorized as medium and large halal industry. I want to talk a little bit about the potential of the halal industry in Indonesia, mostly in food and beverages industry. The policy about the halal will boost this halal industry, and it is a very huge potential to be developed. If we can move to the next slide, now we can see about the Indonesian initiative of making Indonesia 4.0. As you can see in the slide, Indonesia aspires by 2030 to become one of the 10 largest economies in the world. There are 5 priority sectors, which is Ibu Winnie has mentioned. The 5 sectors you can see on the slide, which cumulatively contribute 70% of total manufacturing GDP, 65% of manufacturing export, and 60% of manufacturing workforce. Furthermore, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic provides opportunities for medical devices and pharmaceutical industry to spring up, make the number of priority sector to 7. Our government has set 10 priority strategies for making Indonesia 4.0. Since 2018, I assume you familiar with the 10 policies from material flow improvement to harmonization of rules and policies. This is the things that we need to reach the target in 2030. We also have PD, Digital Industrial Center. It will be a showcase for the Indonesian presidency in G20 for industrial sectors. It is a government agency, part of the Industrial Human Resources Development Agency under our ministry, which was built to help industry in Indonesia transform toward Industry 4.0. PD itself built with the vision of becoming a one-stop solution in the adoptions of Industry 4.0 in Indonesia and becoming a window for Industry 4.0 to the world. The Indonesian government is always supporting the growth of industrial park development, as business owner and even startup establishment have begun to see that industrial parks represent the most excellent environment for entrepreneurs. When locators invest in industrial park, they can easily lower their production costs through their cost implication for machines and parts. This results in more convenient and efficient duty payments and delivery. All these factors would be a vast advantage to promote export activity and produce more goods to accommodate the demand of consumers. This will undeniably transform business greatly. Note that our government proposed 27 industrial park as national medium-term development plan 2020 to 2024. Apart from industrial park, we can see we also developing the halal industrial park. We know Indonesia is hosting the largest Muslim population in the world with a fast-growing middle class. It is a government policy to make Indonesia a global halal production hub, supported by government agencies and halal industry development policies. As the benefit of halal industrial park is, it provides local and global halal food and supporting industry, a complete halal ecosystem for efficient halal productions, import, domestic distribution, and also export to international market. Based on data from State of the Global Economic Report 2019-2020, it shows that there is a big opportunity lie on halal industry with 1.8 billion Muslims across the globe, 5.2% year-on-year growth, $2.2 trillion spending, and projected by 2024 up to $3.2 trillion. By using this fact, Indonesia will welcome any business people to initiate cooperation or developing halal business in Indonesia. At least there are three main reasons why there is a huge halal industry opportunity in Indonesia. First, the huge potential of Indonesia, natural resources that provide an opportunity to be used as industrial raw materials. Then the Indonesia large populations, it is a potential market for industrial product. In addition, Indonesia is the largest Muslim population in the world with 222 million people, which is a potential market for halal products. And the third, there is an increase of building of industrial infrastructures, industrial zone or industrial area that provides facilities and infrastructure to meet halal requirement as well as convenience in running industrial business that produce halal products from material to distribution. The government of Indonesia also putting efforts to strengthen in halal industrial park with Sharia financing, halal traceability system, halal assurance system, then small and medium industry, including halal logistic and halal supply chains. As Indonesia is an excellent position to develop a global halal production base to produce halal foods and non-foods for the world. The government is increasingly focused on increasing the competence of human resources. We know that we strengthening our vocational education system together with the ministries and agency and also the stakeholders. We support the implementation of Industry 4.0 through the development of human resources. It is important to prepare skilled and quality of human resources according to needs of the world of works in industry today.
Eko, could you kindly conclude in 1 minute?
Okay. It is my last.
Okay.
My last slide. As you know, Indonesia participate in many international events. This year, we are the partner country of Hannover Messe 2021, which is held in digital editions. Last week, we also saw our industrial sectors in Dubai Expo through rolling exhibitions, business forum, and performance. I think this is what I want to share with you, and I hope we can discuss furthermore in the next. Thank you, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Pak Revindo, I give the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Pak Eko, for the enlightening and informative presentation. I think the points are very well taken. We have to set our priorities of scale correctly. We have to identify the low-hanging fruit, those industries which stood out during the pandemic, those industries which have the high impact to the economy, and one of which is the halal industry, maybe one that will lead us to recovery. Thank you again, Pak Eko. Now we are going to listen to our second panelist from the policy perspective. We are privileged to have Bapak Hari Widodo. He's the Director of Market Development and Export Information at the Ministry of Trade. He has a master's degree in international development from Nagoya University, Japan. Bapak Hari, the floor is yours.
Terima kasih, Pak Revindo.
Yes.
Bapak Ibu sekalian, serta FGD, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Salam.
First of all, let me deliver my presentation in bahasa. Bapak Ibu sekalian, next. Ini adalah slide pertama. Saya ingin menguraikan mengenai neraca perdagangan Indonesia pada Januari-September, di mana neraca perdagangan Indonesia secara kumulatif Januari hingga September 2021 tahun ini mengalami surplus yang relatif besar, yaitu sebesar 25,1 miliar US dollar, dan ini tentunya dibentuk oleh adanya ekspor non migas selama Januari-September yang naik 39,8% year on year, dan impor juga mengalami kenaikan yang juga signifikan sebesar 31,1% year on year. Di slide selanjutnya, dan kalau kita lihat kinerja ekspor bulanan kita ini terlihat di tahun 2021 tahun ini, di masa krisis ekspor kita menunjukkan pertumbuhan atau pencapaian kinerja yang sangat baik, di mana di bulan Agustus lalu itu mencapai 21,4 miliar US dollar, dan capaian ini merupakan kinerja ekspor bulanan tertinggi sepanjang sejarah Indonesia ada ekspor. Dan di bulan selanjutnya, di bulan September lalu, ini mengalami sedikit penurunan month on month, mencapai sebesar 20,6 miliar US dollar. Selanjutnya, dan kalau kita lihat struktur ekspor kita ini masih didominasi oleh produk-produk industri yang mencapai 77,7%, dan kalau kita lihat pertumbuhannya selama Januari-September 2021, seluruh sektor produk ekspor kita ini mengalami peningkatan yang cukup besar, cukup signifikan peningkatannya. Selanjutnya, kalau kita memperhatikan domestic production and consumption of intermediate atau barang-barang bahan baku dan bahan penolong, ini produksi dan penggunaan bahan baku penolong Indonesia secara umum kita lihat mengalami peningkatan yang signifikan juga sejak tahun 2000 hingga 2017, meskipun di tahun 2009 hingga 2014 ini ada penurunan. Namun kalau kita lihat di grafik ini rata-rata lebih dari 80% dari bahan baku penolong yang digunakan itu bersumber dari dalam negeri, sementara lebih dari 75% dari barang setengah jadi ataupun bahan baku dan bahan penolong atau produk perantara yang diproduksi itu untuk kebutuhan domestik. Selanjutnya, ini menggambarkan mengenai atau penggunaan bahan baku atau penolong asal impor ini yang cenderung mengalami penurunan di seluruh sektor, kecuali untuk sektor manufaktur berteknologi menengah dan tinggi. Dan lebih dari 60% impor bahan baku penolong digunakan oleh manufaktur industri yang pada gilirannya ini akan menyumbang hampir 3/5 dari ekspor bahan baku atau penolong. Dan hal ini tentunya menunjukkan adanya intensitas partisipatif yang tinggi untuk dari sektor-sektor ini di dalam global value chain. Dan selanjutnya kalau kita lihat next slide please, nilai tambah domestik dalam produk akhir dari semua sektor ini mengalami peningkatan yang signifikan. Pangsa nilai tambah domestik meningkat dari 83,2% pada tahun 2020, ini tumbuh menjadi 89,9% pada tahun 2017. Dan meskipun kontribusi nilai tambah Indonesia terhadap proses produksi di negara-negara lain, namun ini kontribusinya mengalami pertumbuhan yang cukup tinggi antara tahun 2000 dan 2017. Selanjutnya kalau kita lihat nilai tambah Indonesia ini menyumbang sebagian kecil dari produksi akhir di negara-negara lain. Artinya barang yang tadi kita ekspor berupa barang penolong ini akan sumbangsinya terhadap ekonomi negara-negara lain ini relatif kecil, namun kontribusinya ini terus mengalami peningkatan yang relatif tinggi. Nah, nilai tambah yang dihasilkan di Indonesia ini menyumbang peningkatan proporsi pendapatan dari global value chain, antara lain kalau kita lihat di wilayah Eropa itu di Perancis dan Jerman, lalu untuk India, Malaysia, Filipina, Singapura, Taiwan, China, dan Thailand ini untuk wilayah Asia, dan Kanada, Meksiko, Amerika Serikat ini untuk di wilayah benua Amerika. Dan kalau kita perhatikan kontribusi Indonesia terbesar di Asia ini karena adanya kedekatannya, misalnya pada tahun 2017 nilai tambah yang dihasilkan oleh Indonesia masing-masing menyumbang sekitar hanya 1,1% dan 1,7% untuk masing-masing pendapatan GVC di Singapura dan Malaysia. Sementara produk akhir yang dihasilkan oleh ekonomi Asia lainnya seperti Filipina, Korea, Taiwan, China, Thailand, dan Vietnam juga mengandung konten yang bernilai tambah yang relatif signifikan yang berasal dari Indonesia. Nah, selanjutnya bagaimana strategi pengembangan ekspor nasional yang akan dilakukan oleh Kementerian Perdagangan, terutama oleh Direktorat Jenderal Pengembangan Ekspor Nasional. Strategi yang pertama ini kita akan melakukan menjaga dan mengembangkan pasar dan produk utama. Kita tahu bahwa kontribusi 10 negara tujuan utama kita sebesar sekitar 70% ini ada ke negara-negara 10 pasar tujuan utama kita. Dan kontribusi 10 produk utama juga mencapai sekitar 60%, dan ini perlu kita jaga dan kita terus kita kembangkan, kita tingkatkan pangsa pasar dan kenaikan produk ekspornya. Lalu strategi yang kedua, kita akan melakukan penetrasi pasar non-tradisional, penetrasi ekspor ke pasar-pasar non-tradisional. Ini pada tahun ini kita fokus ke 20 negara tujuan ekspor non-tradisional yang berada di wilayah Afrika, Timur Tengah, Eurasia, Amerika Latin, Asia Selatan, dan Oseania. Dan strateginya yang ketiga adalah kita akan melakukan fokus pengembangan ekspor untuk UMKM. Kalau kita lihat pada tahun 2020 ini jumlah UMKM ekspor kita jumlah sekitar 13.755 eksportir pelaku usaha berskala UMKM atau sekitar 77% dari total jumlah eksportir di tahun 2020. Namun kalau kita lihat kontribusinya, skala ekspornya ini hanya menyumbang sekitar 4% dari total nilai ekspor tahun 2020. Dan strategi yang keempat, ini kita akan terus mendorong perwujudan dari utilisasi PTA, FTA, dan SEPA. Ini kita sudah memiliki sebanyak 23 skema perjanjian perdagangan internasional yang dapat dimanfaatkan untuk mendorong ekspor. Dan yang kelima, tentunya kita akan melakukan reformasi regulasi, yaitu melakukan penyederhanaan, percepatan, kepastian dalam perizinan dan non-perizinan di bidang ekspor serta impor, terutama untuk pengadaan bahan baku. Selanjutnya, ini detail dari kita sudah terkait dengan strategi menjaga dan mengembangkan pasar dan produk utama. Ini kita sudah tahun ini kita sudah menyusun target dan fokus produk ke masing-masing negara tujuan ekspor utama tersebut. Selanjutnya ke penetrasi pasar. Penetrasi pasar juga begitu, kita sudah menyusun di masing-masing pasar tadi, di Afrika, wilayah Afrika, Amerika Latin, dan seterusnya, termasuk target dan fokus produknya kita sudah coba lakukan penetrasi ke pasar-pasar non-tradisional, ke 20 pasar non-tradisional ini. Dan next. Ini adalah komoditi utama dan komoditi potensial yang juga menjadi perhatian kita, di mana komoditi utama ini adalah yang memiliki keunggulan absolut, keunggulan komparatif, dan juga keunggulan kompetitif, dan serta berpotensi mendukung investasi dan peningkatan produksi, serta spesial dan spesifik produk. Jadi 10 produk utama ini memiliki kriteria-kriteria yang tadi sudah saya sebutkan. Dan untuk komoditi potensial juga ini kriterianya ada memiliki tren pertumbuhan yang positif selama 10 tahun terakhir, atau ini dia mengalami sustainable export growth, dan kriteria lainnya adalah dia berpotensi mendukung pengembangan servicification atau muatan jasa dalam produk ekspor Indonesia tersebut cukup relatif tinggi. Lalu langkah kebijakan yang akan ada di Kementerian Perdagangan, terutama di Direktorat Jenderal Pengembangan Ekspor Nasional untuk mendorong rantai nilai global itu antara lain meningkatkan daya saing melalui fasilitasi kelancaran supply chain bahan baku atau penolong industri di dalam negeri, lalu mendorong percepatan program vaksinasi bagi industri berorientasi ekspor. Yang ketiga, memfasilitasi kemudahan lokal tujuan ekspor bagi industri dalam memenuhi kebutuhan bahan baku atau penolong lokal. Yang keempat adalah mengamankan akses pasar di negara tujuan ekspor, terutama untuk hambatan non-tarif. Langkah selanjutnya, kita juga melakukan ekstensifikasi akses pasar melalui penguatan fungsi perwadak kita. Ada atase dan ITPC yang tersebar di 33 negara tujuan ekspor, di mana pangsa 33 negara tersebut mencapai sekitar 90%, dan penyelesaian perjanjian perdagangan yang ada di negara-negara tersebut. Yang selanjutnya adalah meningkatkan perdagangan sektor melalui perdagangan ekspor melalui e-commerce atau platform digital, serta memfasilitasi pelaku usaha untuk memasuki pasar, terutama pasar non-tradisional. Dan yang terakhir adalah melaksanakan buying mission atau business matching untuk sektor unggulan Indonesia. Dan selanjutnya ini adalah program-program peningkatan ekspor yang ada di Genpen, terutama di tempat kami. Ini dari supply side kita memiliki export coaching program, dan lalu kita memiliki produk konsultasi produk, dalam hal pendampingan desain, rebranding, dan sertifikasi. Dan lalu kita juga ada trade financing, di mana pelaku usaha atau pihak perbankan, ada kerjasama antara pihak perbankan dan kita menjembatani antara pelaku usaha yang membutuhkan permodalan dan pihak perbankan. Kemudian dari demand side ini kami melakukan promosi baik offline dan virtual. Lalu kami juga melakukan ada trade mission, dan kita juga ada tadi memberdayakan trade representatif, ada trade attaché dan ITPC. Dan dari supporting program kami miliki ada INA Export yang ini untuk aplikasi digital menghubungkan antara eksportir dan buyer di luar negeri agar bisa langsung melakukan kontak dagang dengan eksportir kita di tanah air. Kemudian kita juga membangun export center, ini pilot projectnya sudah ada di Surabaya, dan untuk mengembangkan ekspor di daerah melalui daerah, dan ada TPO cooperation, ada capacity building dan promotion. Selanjutnya, saya rasa sudah itu yang dapat kami sampaikan, Pak Arvindo. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, Pak Hari. I think it's very encouraging presentation. There's a way out, there's a light in the end of the tunnel. So if I try to take your points, Pak Hari, so despite the pandemic, there is almost unlimited opportunities in global market. There is untapped non-traditional market, and there are various preferential trade agreement, free trade agreement, and CEPA that Indonesia is now ongoing negotiation or already signed that can be the opportunity for the economic recovery. Thank you again, Pak Hari. Now, our next agenda is the presentation of the analytical work of the COVID-19 pandemic impact on trade and GVCs for Indonesia. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Paul Baker, the expert at ARISE Indonesia. Mr. Paul Baker has over 25 years experience as an economic advisor to the governments across the globe, ranging from G7 to G90s, and various clients including New Zealand MFED, UK, the World Bank, World Economic Forum, World Trade Organization, Asian Development Bank, and many others. Mr. Paul Baker, are you ready? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pak Ravindo. Is it possible, Siti, to project my presentation, please? Great. Thank you. So thank you very much, Pak Ravindo, and pleasure to be here with all of you, distinguished presenters before me and panelists as well as industry leaders. I'm very happy to make this presentation. It was a study that started in around April, I think, this year. And it was looking at what was the impact of COVID-19 on global value chains, particularly Indonesian value chains. And in order to do so, we compared what was happening in 2020 with what happened in 2019 and the trends before that, to see if there was any marked deviation, if there was any changes to it. In conducting the study, I have to thank the team at Bappenas, Ibu Laxmi and Ibu Daisy, who were very supportive, as well as the team, of course, at ARISE Plus, including Pak Ravindo, who is now my moderator, but also Pak Mark, who were very, very helpful as well throughout the study, and my own internal team that worked on this. The way we structured the study was really to look at first of all, what was happening at the global level. So we have a first study that looks at the impact of COVID-19 more globally and the responses that different countries took to combat some of the negative effects of COVID-19. So that's very much a trade study looking more globally. Then we looked specifically at these 5 sectors in Indonesia, and we reconstructed using the new trade data, what were the input-output relationships of these global value chains in Indonesia. And we did a deep dive on 5 sectors, so on the food and beverage sector, on the garment sector, on the footwear sector, on automotive sector, and on the electronics sector. And so based on that analysis, we used 2019 input-output structures. So it was the latest available input-output models that we could use. And then we plugged in this new data, and we tried to see how things were changing, how the structure of trade might be changing overall. So I will start off in that same sequence to present the different findings that we had. Next slide, please. Next slide. Good. So on the global effects, we've all read about it, and they were quite significant. And there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of experimentation in terms of policy making as to how to deal with the pandemic. But generally, the sort of the high-level headline impacts were that labor was very much reduced in the global production value chains because people did not have access to work. There were a lot of lockdowns. And so nearly 10% of global working hours were lost in 2020. And that represents up to 255 million full-time jobs. Air cargo fell dramatically. A lot of the lines, actually some of the connections were dropped altogether, but also access to airport and staffing also were affected by COVID. So that fell 23% in 2020. Maritime cargo also fell, and we know it's continuing to fall, and there are still many problems with maritime shipping in global trade at this stage. Manufacturing itself fell, but not too much in general, and in some countries there was very weak growth even. That's thanks, of course, to some of the automation. There were also special restrictions were lifted for workers in the manufacturing sector in some countries. But there was an effect, it fell below the trend that was being witnessed before the pandemic. Overall, merchandise trade fell by around 5.3% in volume, but 7% in value. And the sector that was affected most was services, which fell by 20%, mostly because of tourism, but also because of transport. And we are witnessing now, of course, growth, and the prediction is around an 8% growth in 2021 for global trade. It's accelerated quite fast in the last 2 quarters, but overall for the year, we expect it to grow by about 8%. But services still won't recover to pre-pandemic levels, nor will goods, as a matter of fact, in 2021. It will take until 2022 to return to the 2019 trend levels. Next slide, please. And so here, overall, there's a large shrinking, as we can see from the graphs in trade, but there was then some recovery that took place towards the end of 2020. And as I say, 2021 is expected to grow by about 10.8%. When we look a bit deeper under the global trade values, there are some sectors that actually experienced quite strong growth, and other sectors experienced quite large contractions. Overall, global trade was $4 trillion lower, and there were 6 product categories that experienced growth. One was the PPE category linked to textiles, and that had experienced the highest growth in global trade. Pharmaceuticals also experienced the second highest growth of all the sectors in global trade. Then there were oilseeds, some different types of chemical products, and then for some reason games and toys were also experienced some growth. The hardest hit sectors were mineral oils and fuels. There was a very large impact on price as well, not just on volumes. The silk sector and other types of textiles and clothing industries, as well as leather, they experienced the lowest growth. Next slide. So how was manufacturing affected? And a lot has been written about this since. At the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of academics got quite excited to be able to share different thoughts about how this might happen. The most sort of widely referred to theory is from Robert Baldwin. And so manufacturing really was hit in three ways. First of all, there were some direct disruptions caused to manufacturing because workers were either sick or there were restrictions on workers being able to reach the factories. There were supply chain contagions as well. So some of the suppliers that were in overseas countries from which global value chains are importing were affected, and therefore it's hard to get the supplies needed, the intermediaries needed to be able to complete production. And then there was a demand side hit, both in terms of the macroeconomic dip. There was confidence that fell, and then many firms were delaying purchase orders, not knowing what would happen. And so it's quite pleasing to see that actually Indonesia in 2021 experienced such a large increase in investment when there was a lot of lack of confidence and a lot of unknowns that were happening during the COVID pandemic. Next slide. So overall, in terms of how was Indonesia hit, well, we heard our colleagues before already present many of these things, so I don't need to revisit it. But generally, although Indonesia was impacted, and it's a very large player in global trade, it doesn't seem to have been affected in quite the same extent as other countries that were more exposed to international trade. And we will visit why some of these reasons might be next. Next slide. So the analysis really takes this global value chain perspective to try and understand how these different sectors moved as a result of the pandemic. Just to say that in general, Indonesia's exports of generic processed intermediate products increased by 15%. Other types of exports fell. And so what we mean by generic processed intermediate products, these are products that are produced by one country, imported by another for further production, but they don't have to be specific to a single industry. They can be used across different industries. And so we saw quite a large increase for those types of products. Generally, basic metals and fabricated metals exports, which went both to China and to Switzerland, accounted for around 81% of the increase in those exports. So quite significant numbers there. And so this is the analysis that we'll do. Just to explain, there are 4 segments to the value chain. There's primary intermediary goods. There are these generic processed intermediary goods, specific processed intermediary goods, which are specific to that industry, and then final consumption goods, which are consumed by consumers in third markets. The perspective we've taken is international. The remit that we were looking at was global value chains. And so we are not going into depth in terms of how domestic value chains were being built up, but we can see what was going on and the switch towards domestic value chains that did take place during the pandemic through the analysis. Next slide. Next slide. So we'll start with the food and beverage sector. And my apologies, it may be a little small for you to see. But these are quite repetitive, so I'll just explain the first chart. The blue line are the exports, the red line are the imports, and the green, the trade balance. And so in the food and beverage sector, we see that there's a very large trade surplus for Indonesia. And that's been growing over time. Imports are growing much more slowly. When you look at the trend line, the faint red line is growing much more slowly than the faint blue line, which is the trend for exports. In 2020, there was no real observed changes in terms of exports. If we look, there was a dip in 2019, as a matter of fact, and then growth happened in 2020. And so actually in 2020, it slightly surpassed the 2018 numbers, and obviously greatly surpassed the 2019 numbers. In terms of what was happening globally, the three largest net exporters in the world are Brazil, Indonesia, and Thailand. And that positioning didn't change as a result of COVID. There were some changes happening in countries that were lower ranked. So, for example, Germany moved up in its ranking while Turkey moved down. Turkey experienced much more severe disruptions to its exports. But in the case of Indonesia, there were no major changes to those exports. Next slide, please. If we then look at the global value chain map, in terms of what was happening at the import level, so Indonesia sources most of its inputs for the food and beverage sector domestically. And so here we're only taking into account what comes from overseas. And we can see as we're going down those lines, starting from 2018, 2019, and going down to 2020, we see that actually primary intermediate goods have fallen over time, and the switch there has been to use more domestic inputs. Generic processed intermediates have more or less stayed the same. Specific processed intermediate products, so these are specific to the industry, these are only used by the food industry. Here they are very, very insignificant amounts, and so not really worth exploring. And then in terms of final consumer products that are imported by Indonesia, we see that these numbers are quite large, around 3.4 billion, and they've stayed the same through the years. In terms of exports, the important item here again are generic processed intermediate exports, which have more or less stayed the same from 21.4 billion in 2018 to 22 billion in 2020. And there has been a slight increase when it comes to final consumption goods that are being exported by Indonesia. Now we do have in the report, which is significantly longer, I've had to distill the slides because we don't have so much time. In the report, we will see who are the final consumers of those goods from Indonesia in each of these different categories. So in each of the different markets, we see whether it's hotels that are doing the final purchases, or supermarkets, or wholesale. And sometimes we do see a switch in terms of who are the final demanders of those products. And so that's quite interesting to look at. In terms of the markets, what we can see is that there's a marked increase, of course, in export value. It ranges from around 20% to 90% with some of the trading partners. Some of these values are very low, and so we have to be a little careful when we're looking at the percentage increases. But some of the top performers in terms of where exports have increased to are India. $763 million worth of exports increased to India over this time. 500 million was increased to Pakistan, and 240 million increased to Vietnam. In terms of specific process intermediate goods, which are quite negligible in overall terms, most of the increases in exports went to neighboring Malaysia and Thailand. But they're still very, very negligible amounts. Next slide, please. In terms of textiles and clothing, here what we see is that there was quite a big drop. This obviously doesn't, the segments that were being exported were not PPE, and there was quite a big drop in demand in foreign markets. However, the rest of the world also suffered quite significantly in this sector. And so what we see is that the position of Indonesia actually increased in terms of world ranking. It moved up its participation in global value chains in comparison to the rest of the world. And other countries such as Italy and Taiwan suffered quite a strong decline in exports in 2020, and that has helped Indonesia move up in this positioning. Next slide. Here on the import side, we see a small decrease in the value of imports, mainly in specific process intermediate products. Obviously, because there's been a decline in production, there has also been a decline in demand for inputs. And then on the export side, as mentioned earlier, we also see a decline across all the different categories of product types. And again, the report itself goes into the specific products that have shown the highest decline, but for the sake of speed, I've only presenting a few tables here. So specific processed intermediate products fell from 3.6 billion to $2.4 billion. And final consumption goods, the final product of clothing, have fallen from $8.9 billion in 2019 to $7.4 billion in 2020. So quite significant declines. And here, if we look at the markets, there's quite a strong growth experienced for generic processed products by Japan. An extra $144 million of exports were sent to Japan. While in the case of Korea, for example, $116 million were decreased exports to Korea. In terms of final consumption goods, it was the exports to the United States that fell most by $776 million, according to the data that we have. While some, and Japan also fell by $100 million, but exports to Singapore did increase by around $77 million. So quite a significant drop that was experienced, particularly for final goods to the United States. Next slide. In terms of electronics, we here again see, so Indonesia is not a net exporter, but is a net importer of electronics. But we did see a slight improvement in the trade balance, mainly due to a reduction in the level of imports. Exports themselves slightly increased, but not by very much over that period. And then we see also a movement upwards for Indonesia in its positioning in global value chains. I'm trying to see. Yeah, so actually, no, sorry, there is no change in the positioning of Indonesia for electronics. It remains quite a small player still. It's within the top 10 markets, but only just at this stage. The next slide, please. So here again, we don't see some drastic changes. I should just say that again, that the input-output tables we've used are looking at 2019 structures, and the only thing that's changed are the trade flows that have been redirected according to that particular structure that we had in 2019. We may actually see some structural changes in the economy. It's unlikely to be seen in any dramatic way between 2019 and 2020, but we might see it going forward in 2021 or 2022, where industries are really changing the way that they are doing business. We've seen a lot of the supply chain disruptions in 2021 is making many multinationals rethink how they are being located and where to locate their industries. But here in terms of electronics, we see a small decrease in terms of specific process intermediates that are being imported by Indonesia for industry. And on the export side, they're very, very minor export levels, around 1.5 billion for specific processed intermediate and around 1.5 billion for final electronics. And so we see a decline again going from around 1.6, 1.7 billion in 2018 to around 1.5 billion in 2020. So the electronics industry has had a clear decline in its integration in global value chains. In terms of changes, according to different markets, most of the fall in export value came from Singapore, both at the generic, the specific, and the final consumption level. So the quite significant amounts that declined here. There was quite a large decline as well to Vietnam in terms of final products. But there was an increase going to Korea, according to the trade flows that we were analyzing. Next slide, please. Right one. So in terms of automotive, here in terms of net exporters of automotive products, Indonesia is one of the largest exporters of automotives in the automotive sector in Asia. And it actually saw an increase in its net exports in 2020 compared to 2019. But overall gross exports actually fell in that period. So its imports fell by more than the exports fell. And so it improved the trade balance for the auto sector. But a very, very sharp decline was experienced in 2020. And we'll be listening to Hyundai later to discuss what impact that has had and what changes have been needed to the industry as a result. In terms, next slide please, in terms of the structure of that trade, we see a very, very sharp, significant decline in terms of processed intermediate goods that are being imported by the industry. And so these are specific to the auto sector. It fell from $6 billion to $3 billion, it halved. And actually also the final consumption goods also halved between 2018 and 2019. It's a very, very sharp decline in the import side. On the export side, it's not quite as dramatic as we mentioned, but there was a fall still, nevertheless, of nearly a quarter for specific process intermediate goods. And there was a small decline as well for the final consumption goods as well. Next slide, please. In terms of markets, what we see as the greatest decline was going in final products to the Philippines, Vietnam, and Thailand. Together, they account for just under $1 billion of decline in exports. In terms of specific processed products exported by Indonesia to other markets, Japan and Thailand were the two markets that experienced the sharpest drop in demand for Indonesian products. Next slide, please. The next and final sector for the global value chain analysis that we looked at was footwear. And we'll have Nike as well making a presentation afterwards as to how the footwear industry was impacted. What we see is actually the numbers are not quite so bad. There was a small increase in exports happening in 2020 compared to 2019, but these levels are still lower than was experienced in 2018 before the pandemic. So the sector itself has experienced a decline. The top three players in terms of the footwear sector globally are China, Vietnam, and Italy, and they all suffered quite a strong decrease in net exports. Indonesia is one of the very few countries globally ranked that experienced a growth in this sector during the pandemic. Its net exports expanded from 3.5 billion to 4.2 billion in 2020. However, the positioning of Indonesia in global value chains remains the same for footwear because the gap in shares are so large that Indonesia is still a very relatively small player. It's a fourth player in the world market, but it has quite a relatively small share in the world trade. In terms of the structure of imports, we see quite a strong decline in final consumption goods and not much change in terms of inputs into the industry. And on the export side, we see an increase from 2019, but still a decrease from 2018 in final products of footwear. Next slide. In terms of the markets, the greatest growth came from Belgium and China for final products, and there was quite a noticeable decline from the United States of $54 million over that period. Again, looking at 2021, I think these numbers will be much more positive going forward. Next slide. So the next thing we did as part of this study was to try and interview industry. So we did enterprise surveys to try and get some feedback to validate some of these statistics, but also to have a better sense as to how government policies were being perceived by industry and what might be suggestions for improvement in that area. In terms of the survey responses, they were quite good. They may not be fully representative of all industries. We can see the number of responses there. And so we need to be cautious when we're looking at these results. But nevertheless, I think they are indicative of what was happening based on the statistics. It mirrors very much the responses we got from the respondents. We have better responses from the food and beverage sector, the textile sector, and the footwear sector. We admit that when it comes to the electronics and auto sector, the number of responses is very, very low. But generally, what comes across for all sectors, according to the survey results, is really a shift away from foreign suppliers to domestic suppliers. And that's referred to as globalization in the literature. And so this reduced vulnerability in the face of a global pandemic makes sense. And so what we've seen is sort of a rush to try and find domestic suppliers that can actually meet the requirements for the multinationals. Next slide, please. Also, when it comes to services, we also see quite a strong shift towards domestic suppliers for services as opposed to international suppliers. And that is indeed also reflects what we saw at the global level, where trade in services fell by much more than trade in goods. Next slide. Next slide, please. So in terms of this shift towards new markets, what we found is that in terms of exports, sorry, or sales, I should say, there is a large increase of sales going to the domestic market, and much less is going to international markets. And so the data that we were presenting before is only looking at what was happening internationally with these different sectors. And so that doesn't always mean that the sectors were struggling. They were finding domestic segments that would be able to buy up their products. And that again really is across all the sectors. We see an increase, sometimes much larger than others, towards the domestic market. So footwear, for example, before the pandemic, the domestic market represented around 48% of sales, so nearly half of the sales. But after the pandemic, or during the pandemic, it increased to 71%. So a very, very large switch for the footwear industry towards the domestic market. The same happened in food and beverage and textiles. It did not happen to the same extent for electronics or auto, and that is also explained by the contracts and the segments of exports that are being made in Indonesia, which are going for further processing in another market. The next slide, please. So we asked a number of questions as to what are the most important factors that are affecting your operations. And so these results are for the entire, all the sectors combined. But you'll see on the right-hand side of the table, we sometimes put in an icon to represent the industry if it was a very significant factor for that particular industry as well. And so the major problems really are in distribution and shipping. And this is more because of the problems faced in the target markets. So it's getting goods, say, into the United States or into China because of some of the restrictions or lack of mobility in those particular markets. The second most ranked high factor was some of the distribution and shipping difficulties faced in Indonesia due to restrictions and closures. And so many businesses felt that that had a very high impact on their industry. A lot of companies complained that they had lost international orders, so a drop in demand in international markets. And then shortage of cash flow, problem of working capital. That was, I think, all of these particular factors are reflective of other global studies that have happened on COVID-19. So it's not unique to Indonesia. So these are some of the major problems that have been evoked as being very impactful for the businesses in Indonesia. Next slide, please. So this slide, and I think it's really going to be impossible for you to see the results. It was looking at how industry was perceiving different government policies, positively or negatively for their business. And so, for example, the government introduced things like tax contribution and reduction rates. They introduced subsidies for businesses, subsidies to individual households, healthcare support. So everything more related to tax was viewed as very positive, tax and subsidies, and quite on a large scale. What was seen as less positive was sometimes tariffs were introduced during the pandemic. Some additional licensing and permit requirements were required for imports. Quarantine requirements were also required, and other types of licensing requirements. And so these were seen by industry as being making life a little bit more difficult for their operations. What was requested by industry, or according to our survey, from the government was more regulatory relaxation. Of course, we need to delve a little bit more into what that means. I think the idea is, though, to try and simplify and digitize as much as possible some of the, say, licensing requirements, introducing further tax incentives, capital assistance, improving market access. So we heard Harry mentioned about further free trade agreements. This was seen as being important by 8 companies. And then there is a number of other slightly less, there's less convergence on the need for these interventions from the different respondents, but there's a host of other types of policies that are also recommended by industry. Next slide. I'm conscious of the time, and this is the last section of the report. So we used all this information to try and come up with some recommendations. Next slide, please. Just to say that the recommendations are cross-cutting. They are not specific to any of the industries, and the idea that they would need to be tweaked, perhaps for some industries. But we tried to focus on what would be important in the immediate term, in the short term, and in the medium to long term. So what we mean by in the immediate, it's really policies that can support business survival and continuity. In the short term, we're looking at addressing some of the barriers and trying to improve trade, access to trade, and GVC participation for the companies. And then more longer term, it's trying to create economic stabilization and strengthen competitiveness and resilience of industry. And so we actually make recommendations in a number of areas, and I will now present them. First of all, in business survival and continuity. The idea, and many countries have done it, of course, is the introduction and adoption of workplace safety standard protocols and easing access to PPE equipment for industry. Many countries have switched to production of PPE and lowered the price quite significantly. There was actually an oversupply of PPE at one point. I think it's stabilizing now. But indeed, so adopting these kind of standard safety protocols are important to keep moving. Introducing support packages, particularly making it accessible to MSMEs, and enable them. Wage support schemes, for example, are an example of how we can assist businesses very, very rapidly with their wage bills. Identifying and collaborating with trading partners to plan the reopening of borders. Borders are reopening, and there are sometimes green lanes that were created by some countries to try and speed up the processing for customs declarations, and implementing a hygiene and security protocol for land transport operators was considered to be important. Enhancing support for the MSMEs through a clinic health check. So this would be a rapid response center to help MSMEs understand or access ways to address cash flow problems or labor mobility problems, and then use online tools to try and improve matchmaking and B2B connections. Next slide. We make a number of recommendations. I won't go through them all for trade facilitation and addressing some trade barriers, but the move towards digitalization of trade processes and paperless trade needs to be accelerated by all countries in the region. That's not just for Indonesia. Making full-time automated processing for customs. Customs opening hours was considered a problem for some companies. Developing pre-arrival processing forms, which is part of the WTO trade facilitation agreement. Improving cargo traceability, and there are a number of technologies that can also improve that. Improving application of post-clearance audits, reinforcing the authorized economic operator schemes, and moving towards more mutual recognition of these AEO programs across countries, and improving cooperation on the ground between the different border agencies, different ministries that operate at the border in Indonesia. We heard from previous speakers as well the importance to digitalize and use e-commerce. I was involved with a project with the Ministry of Trade that was specifically looking at connecting MSMEs to e-marketplaces. And so there's a lot of work that can be done there, but there's a lot of intelligence that needs to be gathered by Indonesian trade promotion centers. We also need to make sure that we have the warehousing and logistics infrastructure to be able to make that happen. And many of these companies need assistance in terms of becoming online and improving their brand and protecting their intellectual property. Another area is looking at promoting trade information and trade finance. Trade finance, supply chain finance instruments are still quite limited and could be improved. And again, technology is there to be able to help improve that. Improving the knowledge and ability to export. We've seen a drive towards the domestic markets, and that's good, but we want to have a more diversified economy. We don't want to also just rely on Indonesia, and there are a lot of opportunities in the global market. So there is a lot of awareness raising, but also information sharing and training that's needed to achieve that. Next slide. In terms of trade logistics, there's quite a lot that needs to be done here. There is the national logistics ecosystem, and there's a number of programs that are emanating from that, which was adopted in 2020. But having a good sense of suppliers' capacities, certification of supplier schemes would also be important if you want to export to the EU. It's becoming more and more stringent that you need to have a full oversight that all of your suppliers are also behaving appropriately. So having the supply maps and certification schemes and intelligence and transparency across that is going to be very important. There are other considerations, for example, looking at different sourcing options, looking at single operating systems for port operators to become more efficient, having an integrated logistics platform, as well as an online single submission form for different types of transport modes. My last series of recommendations in the report, and again I think the report has more details, is looking at regional economic integration and innovation ecosystems. So promoting, we heard it again, I think it was Pak Eko who mentioned the Indonesia 4.0 industry, and the move towards that will be important, I think. Obviously, we have to be cautious as well as the impact that it will have on labor. But using technologies and going forward is going to be important. Having incentive schemes for technology investments through tax relief is a suggestion. Investing further in skills, improving mutual recognition of standards, particularly across the region, is going to be important, and it's very important for GVCs. And then the idea of perhaps having a regional logistics observatory that could be shared across ASEAN to try and ensure that standards are recognized, but also that trade barriers are being lifted as much as possible. So that was quite a long list of things, yeah, happy to pass it back to you, Ravinder.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, for a very comprehensive study result and also very sharp and granular policy implications. I will not try and pretend to summarize your talks, but rather I would like to invite comments or questions, or even data comparison from private sectors, industry leaders for a panel discussion. So I would like to first invite Bapak Tri Wahono Brotosanjoyo. He's the Director of External Affairs of Hyundai Motor Asia Pacific headquarters. He has worked in the automotive industry for the past 6 years. Prior to Hyundai, he also worked for Honda, Nissan, and Renault. He is currently working at Gaikindo in the industrial compartment, electric car development, and also international relations. Please, Pak Tri Wahono.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Ravino. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, clear ya, Pak?
Siap.
Yeah, before I start to explain Hyundai concern, maybe I would like to explain general concern and also condition in automotive industries. So first, I would like to inform about the global automotive industries that currently Hyundai become the number 4 of global player in the world. This is based on data series that we got in 2019. And also now Indonesia become the 13th the best production in the world data. Maybe I explain verbally, Pak. This is just general explanation to the attendance. And then now Indonesia also the 15th global market in the world based on data in 2019. And also we are Indonesia now number 1 the ASEAN market producer, and also number 2 the ASEAN production in 2019. And also
Pak Tri, I think we have problem with your connection. Pak Tri?
Why Hyundai very interested to invest in Indonesia due to big opportunity market in Indonesia and also in Asia Pacific. And then based on latest data that we got from Gaikindo, that this year the condition of automotive is better than 2020, because in this year probably we will get target around more than 700,000 units. Comparing with last year, maybe less than around 600,000 units. So this year better and better. So today Hyundai try to make analysis that future and global there are electricity concern that need to be solved in the world. So today Hyundai try to explain our electricity project in Indonesia and also investment project in Indonesia.
Patri, can you check
Hello,
your
Pak Revin.
connection? Yeah, okay.
Hello,
Patri,
Pak.
can you check? Yes,
Yeah.
can you check your, yes.
Please
Please
go to
carry
the
on.
first slide first, Pak.
Yeah.
First slide first. Next, Pak. Okay, so due to the electrification as a future opportunity that will be for automotive, so Hyundai try to give today opportunity that this is also good in our condition COVID-19. We got big investment from Korea, especially from Hyundai, for this electricity. So today we would like to share the supply chain for electricity. So electricity car. So first we need to prepare from upstream until downstream, from mining, from battery manufacturing, and then car electricity manufacturing, and also the ESS, and finally the recycle. Next one. Why Hyundai focus in EV and today explain the opportunity for EV? Because maybe if we explain the ICE, because in 2020 our market for ICE, as mentioned by Mr. Powell, is declined. So we give the opportunity for EV because this is that currently trigger automotive survive in 2020 and 2021 because big investment from Hyundai around maybe 40 trillion rupiah. So today I'm focused to explain EV because this EV become a trigger, become item that make a trigger the big opportunity investments. So why Hyundai focus in EV? Because trend global that we see in this chart in 2030, almost 50% of market in the world will be EV. So this is one reason why Hyundai also would like to invest EV in Indonesia for Indonesia market and also for ASEAN Pacific and also for the world. Next part. And another reason why Hyundai would like to invest EV is future the battery cost for EV will be lower and lower, and currently the price for battery is around 300 until 200 per kilowatt hours, and next will be around 50. So the next battery for EV will be very cheap. So this is opportunity for Hyundai and EV maker to develop starting from now the electrification era in Indonesia and also for Asia Pacific. Next part. This is a strategy for Hyundai to penetrate the EV that Hyundai continue to increase the efficiency and the productivity, and then make a variant that more cheaper and cheaper, and then we propose to government to support the incentive for EV, and then for price we study for place we study the location for invest for EV, and currently we invest in Cikarang, and also we already commit to Mr. Jokowi that we will invest in Karawang area for battery, and then also we will expand our market to do the export in Australia, Singapore, Vietnam, and other countries for EP, because trend of global will be go to EP. So this is good if we can start now to develop EP Indonesia. And then regarding the promotion, we try to make a fleet program campaign to government, and also to make a charging station route from Jakarta to Bali. This is our program, and then make awareness for EP, and then we do a program launching or product launching for EP for our EP Ionic and Kona. Next. And this is a current price and also incentive that we got for EP. Current price is around 600,000, and we got relative incentive, for example, BBN and PKB, Luxury Tech, PPN, and then income tax, and also for import duty. Next. Except EP, today also we would like to inform all of you about Hyundai plan to invest in Indonesia. This is not EP, that's not only EP, because including ICA and another. So we have a target to invest Indonesia with capacity
Patri,
100.
we have connection problem again, Patri.
So maybe my signal is not good. I close my video.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have planned manpower around 3,700, and we have land around 77 hectare. And currently our construction already done and now under trial. So if someone asking why Hyundai start invest now, not in previous, actually Hyundai already have plan in Bekasi, but this is not a big plan. But now we start very big plan and facility. So this is integrated factory that including from painting, press, machining, engine maker, R&D, and also testing in one packet area. So this is actually this is the first Asia Pacific plant and the largest Asia Pacific plant except Korea and India. And this is a big opportunity for Indonesia if we can expand and can make this plan successfully, especially in EP. We can expand to sales and make small brands in each country. For example, we make brand in Singapore and Malaysia and Australia, and we can export from Indonesia to this country. And currently we under process for trial. So we hope in this end of year we can start of production. Next.
Patri, can you conclude in 3 minutes time?
Yeah. So this is our condition for Hyundai. So actually we have many headquarters and many administrative office in the world. So if you see in the circle, Indonesia is the one that now become headquarter in Asia Pacific, except we have another big plan in Korea and also in India. So this is a good opportunity for Indonesia to expand, especially for segment Hyundai for Asia market. Next. And this is our promotion program. Next. Yeah, for promotion program, we also cooperation with Ministry of Transport. So we ask Ministry of Transport to make mapping the opportunity for fleet sales for EP. So if you see here, the opportunity for EP fleet sales is very big, around 130 in 2030. So if we now start the EP, the opportunity actually the sales is very big for fleet. This is only fleet. If we combine with the private car, so this is will be a very big opportunity for EP. So we Hyundai also request or propose to another maybe brands to join in this EP, and we see that another brand is very interested to also join in this EP era. Next. This is our last action or program that we make test drive EV for Jakarta to Bali and install charging station from Jakarta to Bali. Next. And this is our program that we conduct operation with government to do testing, and then event for promotion and launching of product with Ministry of Transport, Bluebird, and then Jakarta Profit, and so on and so on. Next. This is our product. Currently, we have Kona and Ionic, and this is with battery 38 and 39 kilowatts. Next. Except the passenger car, we also have commercial car. So future private car is success, then we will study to also to introduce for commercial car like a pickup and bus. Next. This is current condition for analysis for EP. So if we say about EP, current strength is zero emission, low operation, low cost, and external acceleration, low noise, and comfort. If we say about weakness, so we would like only say strength, but we will share the weakness because this is new thing for Indonesia. So the weakness is about price, so still expensive, and base management need to be available in Indonesia for battery, and then distance traveling need to be improved, maybe more than 500, and then charging infrastructure also need to be improved. And opportunity is due to this is a new segment. So electrification era is good for Indonesia to create the new business, so the business charging, business battery, business EV, and so on and so on. And then this is also good for Indonesia to become leader EV in Asia Pacific and also in the world. And then due to Indonesia rich of nickel, this is also good for Indonesia to instantly for Indonesia to become a rich country. And then our threat is due to Thailand, Vietnam, and another country also develop EV. We need also to consider another country about treatment to like compete with Indonesia. And also some noise that we heard sometime maybe someone say that the power plant still use diesel oil or coal, so actually the EV is not so clean. So this is also become barrier for us for Hyundai to introduce EV because some noise due to plant issue. And another is about maybe someone say that maybe this EV will stop the ICE. Actually, no, because EV and ICE will together production and selling maybe until 2040, because Indonesia have planned in 2050 stop the ICE. Maybe until 2050 will be stopped, but for suddenly stop, this is maybe impossible. Next. And this is our charging infrastructure that collaborate with government. We have many charging. In here is the list from Jakarta, in Bandung, in Surabaya, in Makassar, in Bekasi, Tangerang. Next part. Yeah, in each province actually we have charging. Next. So by today we would like to ask about our concern about this electrification and also our condition now. That based on our current condition, we already try to test from Jakarta to Bali, and based on our result that for EV itself for charging is very cheap, but for toll cost is very expensive because toll cost from Jakarta to Bali around 700 700 rupiah. So we propose to government to give incentive for all cost from Jakarta to Bali. And another for localization for baterai, we already start groundbreaking by Pak Presiden Jokowi, and we know to make try to make a deeper localization for baterai. And then we now try to give awareness how to make easiness for the EP, and then that EP give a good solution for emission. This is also we try to announce and give awareness to the public. And then we also support to government, propose to government to give support for non-fiscal incentive, and then propose to government to give industry for recycle. And then we from Hyundai SF try to expand our dealers in Indonesia. So maybe this is a presentation from Hyundai and refer to the COVID-19. Maybe this is my final statement in order to reflect on the COVID-19 condition. Actually, many times Hyundai have invitation for share our concern for COVID-19. Actually, from investment itself, we no concern for COVID-19 because we are Hyundai now under construction and under development of factory. But COVID-19, we from Hyundai try to make this pandemic not become the problem, but we try this pandemic become opportunity. So based on this pandemic, we try to develop new opportunity for EV, new investment that another country don't care about this and don't understand about the movement because they're very busy about the pandemic. But we try to prepare the best product for Indonesia that this is suitable for global market. This is EV. So this EV, we hope in future and maybe in next year, because we will try introduce in next year, will give new era and new bridge, new sun for Indonesia. In order to Indonesia can export, can give another country a new green vehicle that this is originally produced by Asia or ASEAN nations. So this is my final speech. Thank you very much, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Tri. That's very interesting. I would like to invite the second panelist from the private sectors, Ibu Devi Kusumaning Tias. She's the Government and Public Affairs Director of Nike, covering Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and South Asia. Her roles include supporting Nike factories partners to expand and invest in Indonesia, as well as advocating for consistent and pro-growth industry, trade, and labor policies. Ibu Devi, it's yours.
Thank you Pak Revi. Assalamualaikum, selamat sore Bapak Ibu sekalian. Mungkin saya singkat saja Bapak Ibu sekalian. Nike has been in Indonesia for over 30 years. We partner with 38 factory partners producing, many products that you love. Some of the variety you can see here. So the range of products, footwear product that we are producing in Indonesia is from the one on the left, which is, produced for mass market, and the one on the right, which is, more performance, shoes with high FOB cost. So last year, we exported, our factory partners exported around 200 million pairs of shoes. This account for almost 50% of Indonesian total export in terms of volume. So what Paul presented earlier really validates our experience on the ground with scientific data and better structure. So maybe, we can go through this slide, Pak Revi. Maybe go directly to the challenge. So this is, really, great opportunity for us from footwear industry to present our point of view, because there's a lot of opportunities for Indonesia, footwear as well as apparel, at least in the sporting industry, really see great resilience during COVID-19. As Paul presented earlier, overall the industry still growth for 9 to 10% within, during the pandemic. Nike, ourselves, we also see a volume growth despite the pandemic. There was, some decrease in growth in the beginning of 2019, but last year we already bounced back. Some factories are ramping up and even expand our footwear production. So it really aligned with Paul mentioned earlier, and footwear industry are intensive, labor intensive industry. So within Nike production network ourselves, we indirectly employ around 300,000 employees. And this is, young population with average age is, 25 to 27 years old. Most of them are, fresh graduate from the SMK or the from SMA. The way the way COVID affected our industry were also, described by Paul earlier. When manufacturing countries, gone through a lockdown, especially in China and Vietnam, the global inventory for Nike footwear is really, on a historical low. Thankfully, in Indonesia, with the help of Pak Eko Cahyono at Ministry of Industry, as well as the support from the Ministry Industry, none of our factory partners has to shut down. So really a big thanks to Ministry of Industry there. And the other issues that we're facing as global footwear buyer is on logistic backlog. I think it has also been presented eloquently by Paul earlier. And in Paul's presentation as well, he mentioned that there's a huge increase of footwear export to Belgium, and Belgium is also happened to be a Nike distribution center for EU. So there's no incident there that we all as we increase our export into the EU as well as other markets, since the market there are bouncing back sooner than we're expected. There are several, a challenge, if I may share, on how to, move forward from the pandemic and how to gain our share, especially in Indonesia as a hub for a sporting goods industry. The first is, this is the old problem really on ease of manufacturing. Some of these items here has been presented by Paul as well earlier. One of the things that we really want to emphasize here is the flexibility to source raw material, right? So thankfully during COVID-19, we see that we need to bring more of material source into Indonesia. At Nike, we are resourcing more into Indonesian domestic player for materials. I think within these 2 years, we increased our material sourcing domestically from previously 55% to 60%. It is not yet the number that we want to be at, but I think it's a great kind of start on how to move more of this supply chain domestically into Indonesia. We are still facing with the skilled workers availability. Again, we're tapping on a lot of program from the Ministry of Industry. If the industry want to grow its volume by a double digit, then the availability of skilled workers also need to grow, because again we're in labor intensive industry. So at Nike, we are projecting or we're expecting available workers for the next 5 years to grow at least double the current numbers. So we're looking at around 500,000 or 600,000 workers for the next 5 years. Another issues that we're still facing, these old issues is on infrastructural and logistic. There are a lot of improvement thanks to Pak Presiden Jokowi push in infrastructure development, but there are still remaining issues on logistic, electricity of reliability, not the availability, but more on reliability, as well as healthcare for workers. This is something new, very related to COVID. During the pandemic, we're experiencing significant workers how do you call it, not turnover, but their absenteeism due to poor healthcare facilities. So we hope that this could be improved so that we can increase our manufacturing capability in Indonesia. The next slide, please. And challenge number 2 is really on trade and market access. So in Indonesia, we're both covering, sales and marketing, where we partner with our distributors to open, Nike stores in, malls and in online and e-commerce platform. But at the same time, we're also, as I mentioned, export a lot of Nike products from our factory partner network. As we entering into the pandemic, we experienced a lot of countries push for restrictive trade policies. We witnessed this in several markets, not significant market for Nike, but still it's chipped out our market share in Russia, in India, in Argentina. I will not go into detail, but we experience this trade restriction as these countries want to kind of protect some share of trade, especially in footwear. And at the same time, we also don't see any progress of the FTA with one of the biggest market for footwear industry. EU SEPA has been around for more than 5 years. So we're really hopeful that, this agreement can be completed very soon. I'm happy to learn from Pak Hari earlier that, the government also want to accelerate the free trade agreement completion sooner than later. But, I think this would be a key factor on how to, bounce back quicker, because, once the pandemic is over, I think every country want to boost their manufacturing, want to get the smaller, kind of pie, because a lot of countries are now in a very difficult economic situation. So the pie is getting smaller, and how really Indonesia have to be ahead of the competition to secure the market access. Unfortunately, also, we also experienced the same thing in terms of restrictive trade policy at home in Indonesia. The thing is that as a global player who do both import and export, and we are a net exporter by large, Nike. So for one shoe imported in Indonesia, we exported out 200 pairs. So by comparison, we're a net exporter. But again, I mean, as a net exporter from Indonesia, our restrictive trade policies may be challenged by our trading partner abroad. And this, trade is always something that is reciprocal. So if, we're doing or limiting the market access for products coming into Indonesia, we may also suffer the same thing abroad. And I described several challenges here. In the next page, please. These are what we call, or what we experience as problematic trade policies for importing shoes into Indonesia. Again, Nike imports, very small numbers of shoes. We import around $150 million US, very insignificant numbers compared to our annual export of $2 billion US. But all of this, restrictive trade policies really put abet or really jeopardize reputation of Indonesian government in buyers' perspective. So we look forward to have a more consistent trade policies that not just boosting export, but also welcoming import, not by opening doors as big as possible, but just have a consistent trade policy, especially for the product that is non-sensitive, such as footwear, where Indonesia is always a net exporter. And the last slide that I have here on the challenge, please. Yes, and as we move forward again, post COVID-19, what we witness on the ground is the shift of what consumer wants from manufacturer, from brands, as what Pak Tri earlier mentioned, where Hyundai boosting up the EV because there's a lot of a market or demands for the more sustainable product. Also the same thing for Nike. Our consumers are expecting us to be more responsible in terms of environmentally, as well as in our labor practices, and that's what we're doing. Thankfully, Indonesia is a very progressive in terms of labor policy. We are signatories of core ILO protocol, for example, but there are a lot of things that Indonesian government can support. The sustainable manufacturing for footwear industry. One of the things that I listed here is, by providing renewable energy options such as direct power purchase, agreement between factories and the power generator. Last but not least, maybe a very quick summary of my presentation here. So we really hopeful that the problem of the past, the traditional ones such as labor availability, logistic infrastructure can be improved. And I think moving forward, we also see that it's very important to stay open economically and to pursue trade liberalization by opening, market access, FTA. I hope the completion of the Indonesia IU SEPA can be accelerated, because we also see that the portion of import to EU has been decreasing from year to year. So at peak at 2016, our export into EU was about 36%, and now it's around 25%, significant decrease. So hopefully by the completion of IU SEPA, we can steal a piece of the cake from Vietnam, who already has signed the deal. And hopefully, I look forward to get the government support on, aligning into sustainable manufacturing. That is, what our consumer wants in the future. Thank you, Pak Revi.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ibu Devi, for very sharp and very detailed comments and analysis of the current situation and challenges in the footwear industry. I would like to invite the third panelist from the private sectors. Please welcome Bapak Daniel Suhardiman. He is the Vice President Director of PT Panasonic Indonesia, but today he's representing the Secretary General of the Association of Industrial Electronics and Household Electrical Appliances, or GABEL. Please, Pak Daniel.
Selamat sore Bapak Ibu sekalian, salam sejahtera, salam sehat untuk kita semua. Izin saya bahasa Indonesia ya, karena mengingat waktu dan banyak pesertanya ini orang Indonesia nih. Saya minta waktu 5 menit aja Pak, karena udah dipakai semuanya ya waktunya. Next. Ini adalah pengurus, saya langsung aja saya skip. Next. Jadi kenalan sedikit, GABEL ini terdiri atas 36 perusahaan, di mana terdiri atas berbagai merek ya, dari merek-merek Jepang, Eropa, China, Korea, dan lokal. Ya, jadi 36 anggota GABEL ini tentu saja kalau kita bicara tentang pangsa pasar, kurang lebih 90% pasar elektronika dalam negeri ini dikuasai atau dipegang oleh anggota GABEL. Jadi cukup mewakili kondisi yang sebenarnya di Indonesia. Next. Ini data melengkapi apa yang disampaikan Paul tadi. Ya, jadi elektronik itu selama pandemi tidak banyak terdampak. Bisa dilihat sebelum pandemi 2019 inilah tipikal permintaan pasar untuk kategori-kategori utama ya, televisi dan seterusnya. Jadi waktu terjadi pandemi di 2020 dropnya hanya sekitar 10% secara rata-rata. Dan diharapkan 2021 ini sudah kembali ke posisi 2019. Next. Nah, ini kalau kita lihat per quarternya, jadi chart yang sebelah kiri adalah produksi untuk domestik, di mana angka 100% ini adalah rasio dibandingkan 2019. Terlihat sekali di tahun 2020, sejak diberlakukannya atau sejak dimulainya pandemi di kuartal 2, memang sempat drop hingga 61%, tetapi secara berangsur naik hingga 100% kembali ke posisi 2019 di kuartal 2 tahun 2021. Tapi seperti yang kita alami bersama di bulan Juli terjadi PPKM, ini yang menyebabkan kembali terkontraksi ya hingga 70% dibandingkan tahun lalu. Hal yang sama dialami untuk produksi untuk produk-produk ekspor ya. Nah, ekspor yang ini sedikit berbeda setelah cukup kembali ke posisi 2019 di kuartal 1, masalah kontainer atau kapal ini makin serius di kuartal 2, sehingga tambah lagi dengan kondisi PPKM ini membuat cukup menyulitkan posisi produksi untuk ekspor. Next. Sebetulnya kalau kita bicara di bidang elektronika, tidak ada yang terlalu signifikan ya dampak dari COVID ini. Yang signifikan cuma dua. Yang pertama tentu saja shipping lines dan peti kemas. Yang kedua terkait dengan semiconductor. Saya akan singgung sedikit ya. Jadi ini nanti tolong silakan dibaca sendiri. Tapi poinnya dengan terdampaknya COVID, memang terjadi ada dua hal terkait dengan transportasi. Yang pertama rate ya, jadi tolong lihat di bagian yang paling bawah, yang biasanya biaya shipping itu hanya 1,5 hingga 2,5% dari total nilai produk, ini naik hingga 8%, 3 kali lipat. Ini yang menjadi beban bagi industri sekaligus. Next. Ini contoh angka yang sebenarnya bagaimana yang namanya pengiriman maupun baik ekspor maupun impor ini terdampak kendala kapal, langkanya kontainer, sehingga pada umumnya dibandingkan kondisi normal sebelum COVID terjadi delay 2-4 minggu. Ini yang sebetulnya tetap bisa diantisipasi dengan cara ya kita pelaku usaha ini akan melakukan adjustment perencanaan produksi maupun perencanaan ekspor. Next, halaman terakhir, semiconductor, tadi saya sampaikan sedikit, bisa dilihat di bagian bawah tengah, memang saat terjadi pandemi, permintaan turun drastis, tetapi di kuartal 4 tahun lalu, ini mendadak recovery sehingga terjadi short supply, tetapi belakangan sudah mulai bisa recovery, dan ini bukan menjadi masalah serius lagi buat industri elektronika. Jadi intinya yang ingin saya sampaikan dari sisi asosiasi, yang paling penting untuk elektronika adalah penanganan COVID dalam negeri. Ya, jangan sampai pembatasan mobilitas ini tidak seimbang dengan tidak memikirkan pertumbuhan ekonomi ya. Jadi ini yang kita harapkan dari pemerintah supaya terjadi balance antara penanganan COVID dengan menjaga pertumbuhan ekonomi kita. Demikian, terima kasih.
Thank you very much, Pak Daniel Suhardiman. Very concise, very straight to the point, and very clear message to the government. And I would like to invite the last panelist from private sectors. Please welcome Bapak Alexander Yahya Datuk. He is the head of Bilateral Committee Chambers of Commerce and Industry Indonesia, or Kadin. He's also the director of PT Barisa Niaga, and he served previously as senior advisor to the Minister of Trade. Pak Alex, please.
Thank you very much, Pak Revindo. Perkenankan saya menyampaikan opini saya dengan bahasa Indonesia, tentu memanfaatkan fasilitas penterjemahan yang ada dan akan lebih nyaman bagi saya untuk menjelaskannya dalam bahasa Indonesia. Pertama, terima kasih atas kesempatan ini. Pada kesempatan ini saya tidak akan mempresentasikan apa-apa. Saya justru sepanjang berjalannya webinar ini mengikuti dengan cukup cermat hasil studi yang telah dilakukan kerjasama antara Bappenas dengan ARISE. Secara pertama saya mau mengapresiasi kerja Bappenas dan ARISE yang telah melakukan studi yang cukup komprehensif di periode-periode pandemi seperti ini, yang tentu pasti ada kendala-kendala teknis dalam pelaksanaan dan aktivitas studi atau penelitian yang dilakukan. Jadi ini apresiasi atas kerja dan studi yang telah dilakukan. Mudah-mudahan bisa terus dilakukan seperti ini, dan nampaknya di sini saya sedikit mau menambahkan, mengomentari, dan juga sedikit mungkin memberikan tambahan opini. Pertama, dalam 1 minggu terakhir ini saya menerima berita bahwa pemerintah, dalam hal ini Kementerian Keuangan, minggu lalu mengeluarkan press release mengenai proyeksi pertumbuhan ekonomi Indonesia pada kuartal ketiga 2021 yang memang belum keluar oleh BPS, namun oleh Kementerian Keuangan ada proyeksi bahwa pertumbuhan ekonomi Indonesia pada kuartal ketiga itu akan bisa mencapai 4,5%. Ini adalah suatu koreksi atau proyeksi-koreksi dari yang sebelumnya bulan lalu, bulan September masih diperkirakan adalah di kisaran 4%. Artinya mungkin dengan preliminary data-data awal yang telah diterima oleh pemerintah, itu diperkirakan bahwa ekonomi kita tumbuh lebih tinggi daripada yang diduga sebelumnya. Sekalipun kita tahu sama-sama kuartal 3 adalah di bulan Juli itu, terutama Juli dan Agustus, adalah puncak daripada Delta varian yang harusnya sangat disruptif terhadap gerak ekonomi nasional. Sehingga dalam hal ini Kadin khususnya, kami di Kadin cukup confident, cukup percaya diri atas masa depan ekonomi dan bisnis kita secara umum. Karena data-data yang kita lihat sementara ini menunjukkan bahwa kita bergerak ke arah yang positif. Seperti kita tahu, COVID-19 di bulan Juli kita mengalami puncak-puncak pandemi di mana tingkat infeksi bisa mencapai hampir 60.000 per hari nasional, dan sekarang ada di kisaran 600 kasus per hari nasional. Itu berarti hanya 1%. Dan data-data ini cukup konsisten selama sebulan terakhir ini, penurunan infeksi, dan mudah-mudahan ini akan terus bisa berlanjut kondisi ini. Namun satu hal yang dipelajari baik di sektor private ya, di sektor bisnis maupun saya rasa juga di pemerintahan dan di semua aspek masyarakat, bahwa ini COVID-19 ini adalah unprecedented, kondisinya unprecedented. Kita terakhir umat manusia mengalami pandemi itu terakhir kira-kira 1 abad yang lalu, dan dunia sangat berbeda ketika itu. Dan sekarang kita berhadapan dengan pandemi yang kita sendiri tidak punya pembanding, dan kita tentu harus bisa bertindak khusus menghadapi ini. Nah, ini kaitannya dengan studi yang dilakukan. Maka masukan saya pertama begini mengenai kebijakan publik yang mungkin menjadi rekomendasi, bahwa kebijakan publik yang dikeluarkan oleh pemerintah atau oleh kebijakan-kebijakan bisnis yang dikeluarkan oleh private sector dan lain-lain itu dalam kondisi yang unprecedented seperti ini harus punya fleksibilitas yang tinggi dan kemampuan adaptasi yang tinggi dengan kecepatan pengambilan keputusan yang tinggi, cepat. Jadi speed itu sangat pengaruh, adaptasi constantly beradaptasi, susah melakukan proyeksi-proyeksi jangka menengah panjang sementara ini sampai dengan benar-benar pandemi telah selesai, dan harus bisa melakukannya semua itu dengan cepat. Dan akibat dari karena itu, maka saya pikir dalam proses pengambilan kebijakan, baik kebijakan publik oleh pemerintah maupun kebijakan bisnis, itu tidak bisa disalahkan bila ada pergantian dan perubahan kebijakan dari waktu ke waktu dalam waktu singkat. Jadi kita berhadapan dengan satu kondisi yang tidak bisa kita terlalu tebak, unprecedented tadi. Di sisi lain kita harus mengambil kebijakan, dan saya rasa sementara kalau dari sisi pemerintah, di sini saya lihat kan ada Bappenas, ada Kementerian Perdagangan dan juga Perindustrian, melakukan kebijakan yang terus berubah sesuai dengan perkembangan yang ada, itu sah gitu. Tidak perlu dipermasalahkan, jadi karena kondisi terus berubah. Kedua, ini juga berlaku saya rasa di bisnis. Di sini kan saya lihat forum ini ada private sector dari Nike, dari electronics, ada dari otomotif. Itu juga perubahan kebijakan itu juga bisa dilakukan dengan cepat, adaptif, dan ya itu. Dan sekarang tentu apa yang terjadi di bisnis, sektor bisnis, perubahan apa yang terjadi yang permanen, gitu. Itu yang penting kita pelajari, bahwa terjadi disrupsi pada saat periode pandemi lagi memuncak, dan mudah-mudahan dalam sebentar lagi pandemi bisa berakhir, maka disrupsi itu akan kembali normal, semua akan kembali normal, shipping akan kembali normal, logistik mungkin akan kembali normal, sehingga disrupsi yang terjadi dalam periode pandemi itu bisa saja sudah kembali normal lagi. Namun bisa jadi dan nampak indikasinya menunjukkan bahwa terjadi juga perubahan-perubahan yang permanen. Contohnya apa? Pandemi ini telah mendorong adanya perubahan besar di dalam apa yang kita kenal dengan digital transformation. Terjadi transformasi digital, percepatan, akselerasi perubahan, perilaku hidup, perilaku konsumsi yang terkait dengan digital tadi. Sehingga sebagai contohnya, kita semua di forum ini mengalami bekerja dari rumah, work from home. Dan apparently, dan ternyata produktivitas kita bekerja dari rumah tidak kurang. Mungkin beda sektor bisa jadi berubah, tapi di banyak sektor bekerja dari rumah tidak mengurangi produktivitas kita. Dan itu bisa jadi permanen, artinya penggunaan office space itu akan berubah. Mungkin tidak akan lagi banyak office space yang digunakan. Saya sendiri pribadi sebagai juga pengusaha ada di properti, kita juga punya concern dengan office space property, office space yang sekarang ada gitu. Jadi itu akan terjadi perubahan permanen, bisa jadi. Lalu di samping itu juga misalnya kita lihat urgensi untuk business travel. Itu bisa jadi dulu kita tahu bahwa banyak sekali kebutuhan untuk business travel dari kota ke kota atau bahkan dari negara ke negara. Kita sekarang lihat apakah masih punya urgensi itu, karena kita bisa melakukan itu semua dengan medium digital. Sehingga saya pikir untuk studi-studi ke depannya harus bisa dilihat permanent changes yang terjadi dari pandemi ini dan impact-nya kepada perilaku konsumsi, impact-nya kepada perilaku hidup pada umum, dan yang tentu berakibat kepada gerak bisnis secara umum dan ekonomi secara umum. Dari terakhir, untuk tidak memperpanjang lagi karena memang mungkin kita sudah melewati waktu yang sudah ditetapkan panitia, bahwa saya pikir kita sekarang mungkin akan berada di dalam titik di mana kita akan kembali kepada normalcy, mungkin dalam bentuk yang new normal bisa jadi, namun perubahan besar akan terjadi, dan perubahan permanen yang telah terjadi dan akan terus mungkin berlanjut akibat dari pandemi ini mungkin adalah layak untuk dipelajari, untuk menjadi materi dari studi. Secara umum, kalau saya pribadi dan juga umumnya teman-teman di asosiasi, di Kadin, tadi juga kita lihat dari beberapa private sector yang benar ada real di private sector, itu juga mereka mengakui pernah ada disrupsi, ada perubahan. Tadi dari Panasonic menyampaikan ada dari industri elektronika sempat ada disrupsi di shipping dan di semiconductor kalau nggak salah, lalu bahan baku sedikit, tapi itu kelihatannya udah mulai kembali normal dan akan bisa jadi kembali bangkit gitu. Seperti itu. Demikian dari saya. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you,
Sore.
thank you very much, Pak Alex. Very insightful comment and even suggestion for future studies, emphasizing on government flexibility and also change in consumer behavior. So we don't have, unfortunately, we don't have time for lengthy discussion, but there's also a question from participant regarding the term of generic process, Paul, and also the response from the panelists. I'll give you opportunity to respond to them, and maybe short response for each panelist, or maybe general response. Please, Paul.
Thanks, Pak Ravindo. I did actually respond in the chat, but indeed, so the idea is we can put them together. It's that industry is using just intermediary inputs into their production processes. But if we separate the inputs, the intermediary inputs, we can say whether they are cross-cutting across different industries, and so they're not specific only to that industry, or are they only specific to that industry? So in the electronics sector, most of the intermediary inputs are very specific to electronics. They can't be used in other industries, and that's why it's quite a large proportion of that intermediary sector. And so that's why we split it up. We have the ability to do so, and therefore we split it up. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you very much, Paul. So suppose that the participants have further questions, please allow them to reach you out through email, or maybe through Ibu Siti in ARISE Plus. So now we have come to the end of the webinar. You know, I wish we could carry on much longer, because I believe this is very interesting topic, but we are a bit behind the schedule. So we have come to the end of the webinar. I would like to invite Ibu Pandey Nyoman Laksmi Kusumawati, the Director of Trade, Investment and International Economic Cooperation at Bappenas, to deliver the closing remarks. Ibu Laksmi, please.
Thank you, Pak Ravindo. Distinguished Mr. Thibaut Portevin, Head of European Delegation to Indonesia, Bapak Eko Cahyanto, Director General of Territorial and International Industrial Access, Ministry of Industry of Indonesia, Bapak Hari Widodo, the Director of Market Development and Export Information, Ministry of Trade of Indonesia, Bapak Daniel Zuhardiman, Vice President Director of PT Panasonic Manufacturing Indonesia, Bapak Triwahono Broto Sanjoyo, Director of External Affairs of PT Hyundai Motor Manufacturing Indonesia, Ibu Devi Kusumanang Tias, Government of Public Affairs Director from Nike, Bapak Alexander Yahya Datu, Head of Bilateral Committee, Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also Pak Paul Baker, and also Pak Ravindo, all participants, ladies and gentlemen. We are delighted to see all of you during this webinar to support our study on the impact of COVID-19 on global value chains, relevance to Indonesian export and development of a recovery roadmap. On behalf of Bappenas and also ARISE Plus, I would like to express my appreciation to every panelist and participants that have attended this webinar and contributed to the rich and insightful discussion of the study. As presented by Pak Paul, we have seen the importance of each study for our economic recovery plan. From the study, we can understand how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the global Indonesia value chain and what kind of policy responses had been taken to overcome the impact of pandemic on economy. Moreover, this study also deep dives into Indonesia's participation and position in the global value chain on selected priority sectors, which are food, beverages, textiles, electronics, automotive, and footwear. Further, the study also provides several recommendations based on industrial survey results and give insight and ideas to strategically and effectively plan for Indonesia to recover better and stronger after the pandemic. We would like to express our appreciation to our panelists for the time and consideration to share their experience and perspective regarding the implementation of the global value chains. We have listened from government, from Ministry of Industry and Ministry of Trade about their perspectives, what kind of efforts have been made, and also Indonesia's future direction to become part of the global value chain through industry and trade policies. Moreover, in this webinar, businesses who are directly involved in global value chain, especially in electronics, automotive, and footwear, have been pleased to share their experiences and provide suggestions to governments in an effort to encourage global value chain. We hope that the study and all inputs from panelists in this webinar today will enrich our understanding on the impact of COVID-19 on global and Indonesia's value chains. As stated by the Deputy for Economic Affairs from Bappenas, Ibu Amalia, the export global value chain is one of the prime movers for Indonesia's economy to recover and get stronger. Thus, Indonesia needs to take advantage of this potential to be able to play a greater role in global value chain. And it's hoped that from this webinar, the webinar can provide insight for the government in formulating the right policies, as well as provide insight for businesses to be more involved in global value chain. Again, thank you for all of your participation and enthusiasm shown during this webinar. We do believe every contribution matters. Your attendance as well as any inputs and suggestions given during this event. We are looking forward to meeting and having your participation on other events. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Laksmi. That concludes our webinar today. Again, I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation for all the speakers, panelists, and participants. Selamat sore, terima kasih banyak bagi semua yang meluangkan waktunya. Saya kembalikan ke ARISE, mungkin Ibu Siti atau Ibu Maulina, silakan. Terima kasih. Atau Ibu Maya, silakan. Oke, tidak ada. Baik, so ya silakan.
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu peserta untuk hari ini. Terima kasih Bapak Revindo, terima kasih Ibu Laksmi dan para panelis. Begitu juga dengan Mr. Paul Baker yang sudah meluangkan waktu untuk hari ini. Kami dari ARISE Indonesia dan Bappenas mengucapkan terima kasih atas support dan waktunya. Sampai ketemu di workshop berikutnya. Salam sehat semua.
Thank you Pak Daniel. Terima kasih Pak Alex. Paul.
Terima kasih banyak. Semoga tetap sehat semuanya.
Amin, amin. Makasih.
Terima kasih Pak Daniel. Terima kasih Bu Laksmi.
Terima kasih banyak.
Bapak Ibu.
Terima kasih banyak semuanya. Pak Revindo semua. Selamat sore.
Terima kasih Pak Alexander. Terima kasih semua Bapak Ibu. Terima kasih.